I wasn't supposed to be there that day. My trip was scheduled to last another 24 hours, and I had every reason to believe that when I returned, my house would be exactly as I had left it, quiet, orderly, and familiar. But a small twist of fate brought me home a day earlier. At first, it felt like a blessing, like I was going to enjoy a little more time to rest, unpack slowly, maybe even get ahead of the routine. I remember stepping off that plane and feeling an odd rush of anticipation, the kind that comes when you know you're about to surprise the people you love. I pictured their faces, the way they would light up when I walked through the door earlier than expected. That was the scene I imagined, but reality had something very different waiting for me. The first moment of suspicion came when I turned onto my street. I immediately noticed the unusual number of cars parked along the curb. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe one of the neighbors was throwing a get-together. But as I got closer, I recognized that these vehicles weren't scattered around other driveways, they were concentrated right in front of my house. I slowed down, my heart giving a small jump as I counted them quickly, realizing it wasn't just a handful. It was dozens. Every space was filled, the lawn edges crowded with wheels I didn't recognize. The sound reached me next. As I rolled up my windows and parked my car, I could hear it, music. Not the faint background hum of a neighbor's radio, but loud, thumping beats pulsing through my own walls. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I tried to process it. I hadn't told anyone I was coming home early. I hadn't given anyone permission to be here. Yet the house that was supposed to be still and silent was alive with noise, laughter, and chatter. When I stepped out of the car, the smell hit me, a mix of grilled food, perfume, alcohol, and something fried, wafting out through the open windows. The front door wasn't even closed all the way. It was propped open like an invitation. I remember standing there on the driveway, frozen, clutching my suitcase like it was the only familiar thing left to me. A group of children I had never seen before rushed past the door, shrieking with laughter as they chased each other. The sound echoed down my hallway. My hallway. I walked in slowly, my feet heavy, my pulse racing faster with each step. And then it hit me, the sight that burned itself into my memory. People. Everywhere. They filled my living room, my kitchen, even the staircase. Men lounged on my couch, women clustered near the dining table, their voices raised over the music, cups in their hands, plates piled high with food. I counted in disbelief as faces blurred together, but one thing was certain. This wasn't a small group. There were dozens of them, close to 100. And hanging in the very center of it all, stretched across the wall in bold letters, was a massive banner. Family means forever. Those words, so warm in another context, felt chilling in that moment. It was as though they were mocking me. This was my home, but nothing in it belonged to me anymore. My mind spun with questions, each one louder than the music around me. Who were these people? Why were they here? How had they gotten in? And why was there a banner that suggested some strange, uninvited bond? I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the sheer shock held me back. Instead, I stood rooted near the doorway, an observer in my own house, trying to piece together the scene. Strangers passed by me carrying drinks, brushing my shoulder as though I was just another guest. Someone laughed loudly near the kitchen, someone else yelled across the room, and children thundered up the stairs that led directly to my bedroom. I watched a man I had never seen before open the fridge like it was his own, pulling out a bottle of soda with casual ease. It was surreal, the kind of sight you'd expect in a movie, not in your actual life. What unsettled me the most wasn't just the number of people, but the complete lack of acknowledgement. No one turned to greet me. No one stopped to ask who I was. They went on with their conversations, their laughter, their meals, as if my presence was irrelevant. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, anger mixed with fear, disbelief mixed with the surreal thought that maybe this was some kind of dream. 92 people in my house. 92 strangers claiming space, eating food, making memories under a banner that declared family meant forever. I gripped the handle of my suitcase tighter, my mind torn between stepping deeper into the chaos or retreating outside to process. Every fiber of my being screamed that this wasn't right, but I couldn't quite move. I was caught in the strange, heavy silence of my own thoughts, standing in the middle of a storm that no one else seemed to notice. That banner was the first thing my eyes locked onto when I finally pushed past the threshold of disbelief. Bold red letters stretched across white fabric, strung up so carelessly yet displayed with pride, as if it were the centerpiece of the entire gathering. Family means forever. The words seemed to echo louder than the music, louder than the laughter, louder than the footsteps crashing across my floors. It was impossible to ignore. That single phrase carried an unsettling weight because it wasn't just decoration, it was a declaration, one that seemed aimed directly at me. For a moment, I just stared at it, my brain refusing to accept what I was seeing. Family. What family? I had not invited anyone. I had not planned a reunion. I had not opened my doors to relatives, much less complete strangers. Yet here they were, crowded beneath a banner that seemed to justify their presence, as if the words themselves were permission to occupy my home. I could feel the air shift inside me, a mixture of confusion and unease pressing against my chest. The longer I looked at that banner, the more sinister it became. It wasn't the warmth of shared memories or love. It was invasive, like someone had tried to rewrite the meaning of my house. I imagined the effort it must have taken to hang it up. Someone had brought it, unfolded it, climbed onto something to pin it across my wall, probably laughing with others while doing so. They had time, preparation, intention. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't random. It was planned. As I let my eyes travel downward from the banner, I started to notice how many people were looking at it too. They'd glance up while clinking glasses, raising phones to take group selfies with the words framed above their heads. Smiles wide, arms around each other, capturing a moment in my home under a message that wasn't mine. The banner made it official for them. It gave the illusion of belonging. In their eyes, this wasn't trespassing. This was some kind of twisted celebration of unity. But unity for who? Not for me. The word family rang hollow, almost taunting, because I wasn't a part of this gathering. I wasn't included in the reason behind it. That made the message on the fabric feel like a lie, or worse, like a claim. A claim over my house, my space, my very life. I tried to imagine what someone walking in from the outside might think if they didn't know the truth. They'd see the laughter, the food, the children playing, the banner boldly declaring family means forever, and they'd assume it was my party. My people. My choice. But it wasn't. The music pulsed beneath it, a strange soundtrack to my spiraling thoughts. At one point, a man raised his cup and shouted something about forever while pointing at the banner. Everyone around him cheered, and for a second, the sound of agreement drowned out everything else. Their voices merged into a chant-like wave, and my stomach dropped as I realized how many of them believed they had a rightful place here. That simple piece of cloth had given them a sense of identity within these walls. It was like watching strangers wear a mask labeled family while I stood there faceless, stripped of my place. My eyes kept going back to it, as if it held some hidden answer. I thought about the phrase itself, 3 words that were supposed to bring comfort, but instead only deepened the dread. Forever. That word gnawed at me. Did they think this was permanent? Did someone truly believe that what was happening in my home was justified by the idea that family, however they defined it, couldn't be excluded or denied? I noticed a few children pointing at the banner and asking questions, and the adults just nodded proudly, as though it explained everything. I overheard a woman telling a teenager, "That's what it's all about," her voice filled with conviction. It sent a chill through me, because her certainty made it clear, whoever these people were, they weren't uncertain about being here. They felt entitled. They felt rooted. And that banner was their shield, their explanation, their excuse. Even the smallest details around it added to the discomfort. The edges of the cloth were frayed, as if it had been used before, pulled out from storage for gatherings like this. It wasn't new, which meant this wasn't the first time it had been displayed somewhere. It carried history. Maybe this was a symbol that traveled with them, wherever they went, claiming new spaces under the guise of kinship. The thought made my skin prickle. I kept asking myself who brought it, who wrote those words, and who decided it belonged in my house. Someone had to be behind this, someone who believed those 3 words gave them power. My gaze drifted over the crowd, searching faces, hoping for a sign of the person who had hung it there. but no one looked suspicious. They all seemed too comfortable, too at ease, as if the banner had always been there, as if my house had always been theirs. I could feel my jaw tighten as I realized the banner wasn't just decoration. It was a message directed at me, intentional or not. It dared me to challenge the idea that they belonged, dared me to step forward and say no, when everything about it screamed yes. And the longer I stood there beneath it, the more I felt the unsettling truth press down on me. It wasn't just a banner anymore. It was a statement, and it was claiming my home right in front of my eyes. At first, my mind tried to push it away, to convince me that what I was seeing wasn't real, that maybe I was misunderstanding the situation. I blinked hard, thinking maybe fatigue from travel was distorting everything. Maybe this was some strange dream I hadn't yet woken from. But the noise, the movement, the press of bodies inside my home, and the sight of that banner wouldn't let me escape. Disbelief clung to me like a heavy fog, keeping me suspended between wanting to deny what was happening and the slow, creeping realization that there was no mistake. 92 people were in my house, and none of them should have been there. The disbelief gave me a strange kind of numbness at first. My feet felt stuck, my hands tight around the handle of my suitcase, as if gripping it might tether me to reality. I kept telling myself, maybe this is some kind of mix-up, maybe someone rented the wrong place, maybe there's a reasonable explanation. But as I scanned the scene, people laughing too loudly, a teenager sprawled on my couch with shoes on, children knocking over framed photos on the hallway table, food and drinks spread across my counters, it was clear this wasn't a mistake. They were too comfortable, too settled. They were acting like this had been planned. The disbelief quickly started to melt into something sharper. Confusion tugged at me in every direction. My thoughts raced, asking questions I couldn't answer. Who organized this? How did they get inside? Why my house, of all places? My mind combed back through the days leading up to my trip, searching for clues, for cracks I might have missed. Did I forget to lock a door? Did someone close to me know I'd be away and use the opportunity? Each unanswered question only fed the knot forming in my chest. And then the anger started to rise, cutting through the confusion like fire. It came in bursts at first, a flash when I saw a stranger carrying one of my plates piled with food, another when I noticed muddy footprints trailing across the floor I had scrubbed before leaving. Anger when I realized someone had moved my furniture, shoved the chairs against the wall to make space for dancing. Anger when I heard the unmistakable sound of a glass shattering in the kitchen, followed by laughter, not apology. My house was being treated like a playground, like a rental hall, like it meant nothing. The anger wasn't loud yet. It burned quietly, simmering beneath the disbelief that still clung stubbornly to me. My voice stayed trapped in my throat. Every time I opened my mouth to demand answers, to scream, the words shrank back, swallowed by the chaos around me. How could 92 people be so oblivious? How could not one of them stop and ask who I was, why I was standing frozen at the doorway? The anger made my hands tremble, my heartbeat pound so hard I could hear it over the music. It was the little things that made it worse. A boy brushed past me without even glancing up, sticky juice dripping from his cup onto the floor I had polished just days before. A group of teenagers laughed in the corner, tossing popcorn at each other like it was their living room, not mine. Someone opened the refrigerator again, pulling out leftovers I had saved, eating them without hesitation. Every second layered disbelief, confusion, and anger on top of one another until I felt like I might explode. My eyes darted around, trying to find one familiar face, one person who could give me some kind of explanation, but there was no one. Only strangers. They looked at me but didn't really see me, as though I were invisible, a ghost in my own space. That invisibility was its own kind of wound. It was infuriating. It made the anger inside me twist tighter, demanding to be released. I felt my throat tighten as the confusion tangled with fury. This wasn't just a party. This wasn't just noise or inconvenience. This was my sanctuary being overrun, my trust shattered. The banner looming overhead with its mocking message only fueled the emotions further, as though it were daring me to fight back. My disbelief was gone by then. I couldn't pretend anymore that this was a mistake. My confusion had sharpened into suspicion, every unanswered question hinting at something deeper, something intentional. And my anger, no longer flickering quietly, was pushing hard against the walls of my chest, demanding to break free. I knew I couldn't stand frozen forever. My emotions were building too quickly, the tension between disbelief, confusion, and fury winding into something unbearable. Each second I remained still, the scene in front of me seemed more unreal, yet at the same time more permanent, as if these strangers were cementing themselves into my space. I clenched my fists, my pulse roaring in my ears, and felt the undeniable weight of a choice pressing down on me, heavier than the suitcase still at my side. The strangest part wasn't just the sheer number of bodies crammed into the rooms I once thought of as safe havens, but the way they behaved inside them. It wasn't the nervous energy of people who knew they shouldn't be there. It wasn't the hesitant glances of intruders caught in the act. No, what unsettled me most was how natural they looked, how completely at home they seemed in a place that belonged to me. They had claimed it as if they had always lived there, as if the walls and furniture and air were theirs by right. I stood by the doorway, watching in disbelief, my anger churning, while they moved through the rooms like owners instead of guests. Someone had taken over the kitchen with a rhythm that suggested familiarity. Pots bubbled on the stove, pans sizzled with meat, and the refrigerator door opened and shut repeatedly, each slam echoing through my chest. A woman leaned against the counter, chatting casually as though she had stood there hundreds of times before. Strangers washed dishes in my sink, leaving greasy watermarks on the faucet I had polished. It was as if my carefully kept kitchen had been transformed into the headquarters of their celebration, and I was the one intruding. The living room, the space I usually guarded for rest, was stripped of its usual peace. Cushions had been tossed onto the floor. A man I didn't know stretched out on my sofa with his shoes still on, one arm draped lazily over the back, laughing so loudly I could see the veins in his neck. Teenagers had set up a makeshift dance floor, stomping across the hardwood as if it were a stage, their sneakers scuffing the surface I had once taken pride in keeping clean. Empty cups and plates were scattered carelessly on the side tables. The framed photos of my family, once neatly lined up, had been shifted or knocked over, replaced by half-finished drinks. Each small detail shouted the same truth: they weren't acting like guests. They were living as if this were theirs. Even upstairs, I could hear it. Thudding footsteps and shrieks of children echoed from the bedrooms. One of the doors slammed shut and then opened again, the sound of drawers being pulled out and shoved back in filling the air. I clenched my fists tighter as I imagined strangers rifling through my belongings, touching things I hadn't given anyone permission to touch. The upstairs was supposed to be private, a sanctuary even from close friends. But here, it had been turned into a playground. The sound of a mattress creaking made my stomach twist. The backyard wasn't spared either. Through the windows I saw clusters of people sitting on my lawn chairs, sipping drinks while kids ran across the grass, trampling the flowers I had planted with care. A man was at the grill, smoke rising as he flipped burgers like he owned the place. A cooler I didn't recognize sat on the patio, overflowing with bottles. My backyard had become the heart of a festival, but one I had never been invited to attend. The thing that cut deepest wasn't the noise or the mess, it was the casual way they dismissed me. Strangers brushed past me carrying plates of food, bumping my shoulder without even pausing to apologize. A group of women glanced at me briefly before turning back to their conversation, their eyes sliding over me like I was nobody, like I was part of the furniture. Children darted around my legs without hesitation, spilling juice onto my shoes, too lost in their play to notice me at all. Each encounter made me feel less like the owner of the space and more like an outsider trespassing in it. They treated my house not as borrowed space, but as their own foundation. They knew where to find utensils, where to place food, which light switches to flip. The familiarity chilled me because it wasn't the fumbling curiosity of first-time visitors. It was practiced, confident, almost rehearsed. It was the behavior of people who had already decided this house was theirs. The longer I watched, the clearer it became that no one intended to stop. No one even thought there was something to stop. This wasn't a quick gathering that would dissolve at the sound of the door opening. This was organized, comfortable, and deliberate. They laughed freely, sprawled across every room, rearranged my space without hesitation, as though I were invisible. They didn't look like intruders stealing a moment. They looked like residents living their lives. That realization pressed down on me harder than the noise or the crowd. It wasn't only that they had entered without permission. It was that they carried themselves with an ownership that stripped me of mine. Every gesture, every laugh, every careless move declared the same thing: they belonged here more than I did. And the sickest part was the ease with which they believed it. I couldn't keep standing there like a statue, invisible in my own house. The chaos around me kept pressing closer, and the questions inside me grew louder, more urgent, until I felt like they might burst out of my chest. Someone had to know what was happening. Someone had to have answers. My eyes scanned the room again, slower this time, looking for a face that stood out, someone who might be in charge, someone who might recognize me, or at least explain why 92 people thought they had the right to be in my home. At first, it felt impossible. Everyone was moving so quickly, so absorbed in their conversations and laughter, that no one seemed available. A woman in the kitchen raised her voice over the music, calling out directions to others, like she had taken the role of hostess. A man near the hallway was directing kids to different rooms, telling them where they could and couldn't play, his tone confident, authoritative. My gaze lingered on him. He spoke with the kind of assurance that suggested this wasn't random. He acted like he knew the boundaries, like he had already mapped out my house and assigned spaces. I moved a little closer, my hands tight at my sides, my breath shallow. As I edged into the room, people brushed against me without acknowledgement, laughing, shouting, bumping into my suitcase as though it were just another piece of clutter. My pulse raced as I tried to steady my voice, rehearsing in my head what I might say. Should I demand answers? Should I scream? Or should I try to be calm, to keep control? Every scenario replayed in my head with different outcomes, none of them satisfying. I finally stopped near the man by the hallway. He was older, his hair graying at the temples, his expression confident, almost smug. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, he clapped a younger man on the shoulder and said loudly, "See, I told you this house was perfect. Everything fits just right." My stomach twisted at those words. Perfect. As if my home had been chosen, evaluated, and approved for their use. I wanted to grab him, to shake him, to demand what gave him the right, but the words stuck again. Instead, I felt my anger coil tighter, my confusion growing heavier with each second I remained silent. I turned away, my eyes darting across the room again. Maybe someone else would be easier to approach, someone less commanding, someone who might accidentally reveal the truth. A woman with a clipboard caught my eye near the dining table. She was jotting things down, occasionally checking boxes, like she was keeping track of something: food, people, maybe even a schedule. She looked too organized for this to be a random gathering. My feet moved toward her almost without my permission, pulled by the possibility that she was the one orchestrating everything. But as I reached her, she glanced up only briefly before looking past me, smiling at someone else across the room. She didn't pause to ask who I was. She didn't even register my presence. She kept writing, humming under her breath, completely at ease. I hovered there, waiting, hoping she might acknowledge me, but she never did. My throat burned with words I couldn't seem to release, and I stepped back, frustrated, angrier than before. The more I searched for answers, the more unsettling it became. Everywhere I looked, there was evidence that this wasn't spontaneous. The food spread across the counters wasn't thrown together, it was organized, with trays and labeled dishes. The music wasn't random, it was blasting from a large speaker someone had carried in, wires snaking across the floor. Even the children had structure, some carried matching wristbands like they had been assigned for a group activity. None of it felt like an accident. Someone had planned this, and whoever it was, they had done it with certainty, with confidence that this house would be theirs for the taking. I tried to piece it together from fragments of overheard conversations. Snippets floated to me through the crowd, someone mentioning a reunion, another saying, "It feels like home," someone else laughing about how we needed a place big enough. My jaw tightened as I absorbed those words. Reunion. Home. Place big enough. They were talking about my house as though it were some rented hall, as though my walls and memories and privacy meant nothing. My chest felt tighter with each passing minute. The questions no longer circled gently in my mind. They jabbed at me relentlessly. Who had the authority to organize this? Who had the keys to my house? Who dared to decide that 92 people could invade my life without a word to me? My thoughts grew darker as the possibilities formed. Was it someone I knew? Someone close enough to betray me? Or was this the work of strangers who had somehow gained access, emboldened by numbers and a shared belief that what they were doing was justified? Everywhere I looked, they carried on as if the answers were obvious, as if their right to be here didn't need explanation. And the silence in return, their complete lack of acknowledgement of me, only deepened the mystery. My search for answers wasn't leading to clarity. It was only pulling me further into the realization that I might not want to hear the truth when it finally came. Standing there, surrounded by the noise, the laughter, the careless way strangers treated my house, I began to feel the weight of something deeper pressing down on me. This wasn't just about a ruined evening or an unwelcome party. It was about something more human, more unsettling, something that cut into the very core of what home means. My walls, my furniture, my belongings, all of it had been stripped of the sense of safety I once tied to them. Every corner now felt exposed, vulnerable, as though my privacy had been peeled away and put on display for nearly 100 people who didn't belong there. As I watched them laugh and dance, the banner looming over their heads, the thought of boundaries filled my mind. Boundaries weren't just about walls and locks. They were about respect, trust, and the unspoken agreement that what belongs to someone else is theirs alone. Here, in my house, those boundaries had been shattered. It wasn't simply a case of people entering without permission. It was the way they acted once inside, the way they assumed ownership, that showed how deeply my boundaries had been violated. The longer I stood there, the clearer it became. They weren't going to give them back willingly. Trust was another word that kept resurfacing in my thoughts. To open your home, even figuratively, requires a measure of trust in the world, in the people around you. We trust our neighbors not to overstep, our friends not to take advantage, our families not to abuse the closeness we allow. But looking at the scene in front of me, I felt that trust collapse. If 92 strangers could so easily find their way in and behave as though I didn't exist, then what did that say about the fragile threads of trust one had always relied on? My confidence in people, in the idea of shared respect, felt like it was unraveling thread by thread. The banner, still hanging above, seemed to twist the knife. Family means forever. I thought about that word, family. The people under that banner believed it gave them belonging, but what about me? Where did I fit into their version of family? The truth was, I didn't. To them, I was irrelevant. The irony was that the word meant something sacred to me, tied to bonds of love, care, and responsibility. Yet here it had been twisted into an excuse for invasion, as though simply declaring themselves family gave them the right to erase the boundaries of my life. It forced me to question not just their actions, but the very definition of the word. What does family mean if it becomes a weapon instead of a refuge? The deeper I thought, the more I realized this wasn't just about them. It was about me too. How easily had I assumed that home was permanent, that the locks on my doors and the walls around me would always be enough to protect what I valued. That illusion shattered the moment I saw strangers sprawled on my couch, eating my food, ignoring my presence. Home wasn't just about a structure. It was about the meaning we assigned to it, the sense of belonging, of control, of being rooted in a place that reflects who we are. And in that moment, I felt stripped of all of it. Every voice in the crowd, every careless laugh, every spilled drink echoed with the same reminder: nothing is guaranteed. Trust can be broken. Boundaries can be ignored. What we hold sacred can be taken, sometimes without warning, without permission. That realization was harsh, but it was undeniable. My eyes kept circling back to the faces around me. Some of them looked joyful, others distracted, some simply indifferent. But none of them carried guilt. None of them wore the expression of someone who believed they were in the wrong. That, more than anything, revealed the truth. They weren't here by accident. They weren't even trying to justify themselves. They believed in their right to be here, under the banner, inside my walls. And it was that belief, that chilling conviction, that turned this from a simple invasion into something more profound. What haunted me most was the possibility that this wasn't just about one night. If these people could so easily cross the line once, what would stop them from doing it again? If family could be stretched to mean anyone, then what good were locks? What good were rules? What good was trust? The very fabric of what I thought I could rely on in life, privacy, safety, respect, felt suddenly fragile, as if it could be ripped apart any time by the will of others. The bigger lesson was undeniable. Home isn't invincible. Family isn't always what it seems. And trust, once shaken, doesn't come back untouched. The invasion of my house wasn't just a physical violation, it was an emotional one, a stripping away of assumptions I had carried for years. The walls around me had always felt solid, but in that moment, they revealed just how thin they could be when the world decided not to respect them.